Hello, everyone, and welcome to FCC License Exams webinar. I'm Charles Pascal, your instructor. The key for this webinar is that all the information you're going to learn today will be from FCC published test questions. Not only will you learn from the test questions, but they will be displayed on your screen in the exact same manner that you will be tested if you should decide to take the FCC commercial exam. I'm using questions from different FCC exams, such as the technician, the general radio telephone, the GMDSS, to illustrate some points. And we'll be covering satellites today on that. So let me give you a little bit of background of why I'm teaching this to you. I'm an instructor who's had 39 years of teaching experience. When 1985 turns in January, or I said 2025 turns in January, excuse me, I will have had 40 years of teaching on 2025. I'm teaching this class to you from a boat located in the Marina del Rey, very near a restaurant called the Chart House, and we're sitting here on an overcast day. My wife and I have lived on the boat for 30 years. We love amateur radio. I'm chairman of a couple of radio groups, also along the Southern California Yachting Association. So I do a lot of work in telecommunications. I'm also a counselor for Abco Technology, where we work with cybersecurity. So I'm passing a lot of this knowledge on to you that I've accumulated in 39 years, and I really hope it will be helpful should you decide to take an FCC exam, because this is what this is about. All FCC questions are published. I will also have a master's degree in education, so this is going to give you a good idea as to who is teaching you. So our topics today will be covering the following: a Forbes study, which is the importance of getting a credential and why you should have that credential validated. Then we're going to teach you a sample class as to how FCC questions are done and how we teach, so you get an idea of our learning style. Then at the very end, we'll list with GROL job listings, general radio telephone license job listings, jobs you can get from all of this. And then we'll talk about our next webinar topic, which will be coming up on June 15th. We'll discuss that. It'll be about the ionosphere. So we'll give each webinar will give a slightly different topic so you'll know how it works. We're now going to our next slide, which we're looking at the Forbes study. Now, very interesting what has been happening, and it actually has accelerated according to Forbes during the pandemic. During the pandemic, a lot of people started even stretching their qualifications on resumes more than they did before the pandemic. Forbes conducted a study in 2022 and 2023, and they found out that from businesses, they were able to calculate that 70% of the resumes submitted to companies had statements that were false. So a lot of companies now have gone to this idea of, well, you might have took a class in something, or say you took a class in something, or your transcripts have stated you took a class in something, but we got to get these credentials somehow validated. Now, you can validate those credentials through a government license. In our case, it's the FCC General Radio Telephone, Radar, GMDSS. In computers, you could validate through CompTIA for cybersecurity, A plus, Net plus, Security plus, etc. Cisco has their validation for CCNA. But the point is that schools and academic institutions have gotten to the point now where it is very important to validate your credentials. So if you state that you have skills in a particular area, the importance of validating those skills for a job is highly important for you, because then if a company will believe that, your next step will be that call for a interview, perhaps either by phone or in person. And then after that, wanting that to lead to a very good job for you. So we're just trying to give you more points on how to better compete in this job market. And the way to do that is a validated credential. Now we're going to start our next slide. We're going to start with an intro to satellites, how they came about. Now, satellites, VHF, which is very high frequency. Communication has always been line of sight. The simplest definition is as far as your antenna can see, is basically as far as you can talk. We'll complicate it a little bit by telling you that curvature of the earth and gravity sometimes can extend that range to maybe 10 to 15% beyond the line of sight. So when very high frequency began to become practical in the 1950s, the question was, how do we break above the line of sight barrier for communications? What can we do? Well, the first person that actually created something about that was a person that I actually met, had the privilege of meeting him in the 60s. His name was Art Gentry, or Arthur M. Gentry, and his call was W6MEP. And he said, being a ham, we're experimenters. I'm going to take and I'm going to put a transmitter and a receiver on a mountaintop, and I'm going to enable amateurs who access my transmitter and receiver on top of this mountain to extend the line of sight range. So he did that. He got the FCC to approve a license for his transmitter and receiver on a mountaintop, and he called that transmitter and receiver a repeater. So the call sign for Art Gentry's repeater was K6MYK. Art's original call sign was W6MEP. So this repeater went up in 1958. When did I hear it? First time I heard Art's repeater is I was in a radio store in Los Angeles in the summer of 1959. The store was called Henry Radio, and they had Art's repeater on demonstrating over the where they had a room to you could see radios, and Art's repeater was on the radio, and I were hearing all these people on 2 meters, which was a line of sight band that you could only talk as far as your antenna could see. All of a sudden I was hearing people in Santa Monica talking to people in the San Fernando Valley, talking to people as far south as Dana Point, and even down to San Diego, because that night they had a little bit of a tropo condition, and as far north as Santa Barbara, all through Art Gentry's repeater. And many people at the time were fascinated and going, this is really something. The repeater actually extended the line of sight of VHF communications. That's what it did. Now, how does this repeater work? What enables a repeater to do that? Well, the first thing we have to know about a repeater or a satellite is that repeaters have to have an offset pair of frequencies. That means they receive on one frequency and transmit on another. If they received and transmitted on the same frequency, the transmitter would kill of the repeater would kill the small transmitters of the users trying to access it. So repeaters have an offset, a different frequency to receive and a different frequency to transmit. Just like satellites have an offset too. It's the exact same thing, but in satellites it's called the upload and the download frequency. So they receive on one frequency and they transmit on another, and that is known as the repeater's offset frequency. So we'll take a look at a question from the technician license exam. It's from T2A01. If you decide to take your technician, you're going to get this question. What is a common repeater offset in the 2-meter band? Now they're going to go through the 4 choices. I won't read them all, but you can read them on your screen. Take a look at them. You see there's 4 choices. See if you can guess the one. The correct answer is B, plus or minus 600 kHz. So it means the repeater is transmitting on one frequency and receiving on another. Let's do an example. Let's say that you are on 2 meters and a repeater is transmitting on 146600. That's where you would receive and hear the repeater. But if you wanted to talk to it, you would talk to that repeater on 146.000, 600 kilohertz down. They go, oh, well, these repeaters have offsets. Are they standardized? Yes. The International Telecommunications Union in Geneva, Switzerland, has standardized repeater offsets for the entire world. So that if I have a repeater in Mount Lee, like Art did at one time, or you were looking at a repeater from where this broadcast is coming from in Serbia, and it was set up on a mountain, the offsets, the receive and transmit frequencies would be the same because the world agreed to a standardized transmit and receive frequencies of offset. Once that was done, this is going to open the way to satellites. So now, after repeaters, we go, wait a minute, if it works on repeaters, what if we put something into space? Well, they did. They put Oscar 1 in the 1960s into space, but we're going to focus mainly on the satellite systems that you'll encounter for the general radio telephone. And we have COSPAS/SARSET, which is for search and rescue. That's a United Nations effort. It's actually started by the Russians. United States joined, and now many countries are are, are joining that COSPAS system. Inmarsat, which is another system for Inmarsat store and forward packet or computer systems for the maritime industry. Iridium, which many voters use, and Starlink, which Elon Musk has put up. So you have all different types of satellite systems that are operating in space that actually started off the offset situation for repeaters. And in the Starlinks, he has the widest frequencies, 10 to 86 gigahertz, which is very high. You go, well, why did Starlink use such high frequencies? Because with higher frequencies and as the technology improved, Starlinks could actually use smaller components. Now we'll go to our next slide. We'll take a look at T8B10. What is a LEO satellite? Well, the term LEO you're going to see quite a bit. And we'll take a look at the choices. Think of the term LEO. Is it a sun synchronous, highly elliptical orbiting, a satellite in low energy operation mode, a satellite in low Earth orbit? Well, LEOs are satellites that are in low Earth orbit, and they are very key, especially for the maritime industry, as we'll get to in a couple of moments. So the LEO is a low Earth orbiting satellite. So LEO is a low Earth orbiting satellite. Now we'll take a look at a general radio telephone question. What is the orbiting altitude of the Iridium satellite? 485 miles. The orbiting altitude is 485 miles for the Iridium satellite. So LEO at Iridium. Now, Iridium, if you're out on a vessel or cruising, you could use that to make telephone calls. Very comprehensive system, both for commercial yachts and pleasure. You'd use that Iridium system. They use a system of low Earth orbiting satellites. 485 miles above the Earth. Now we'll take a look at our next slide. What is the following statements about the Iridium satellite is true? And we'll have you look at the choices. Take a look at it. There are 48 spot beams with that are 38 miles in diameter. Iridium has 66 satellites in orbit. So 66 satellites, each satellite with 48 spot beams. The Iridium system can basically cover the world using that kind of coverage. So that works. And it has, again, it's still using that principle that we talked about, upload and download frequency. Now, one thing I'll add about a satellite is that a satellite receiver is called a transponder, which it receives over a wide range of frequencies so that more than one user can use a satellite. That's the difference between a satellite and a repeater. On a repeater, usually only one or two users at a time can use it, but on a satellite, many more can use it because you have the transponder that's at work for you in that satellite system. Now we'll take a look at our next slide. We'll take a look at a role of satellite system that's importance to search and rescue. So you take a look at the choices. Would it be COSPAS SARSET, Inmarsat, GPS, iridium, Kosbas Sarset. Kosbas Sarset was set up by the Russians, joined by the United States. It has 65 satellites in orbit, and it is dedicated strictly to search and rescue. Under the Kosbas satellites, you cannot have normal traffic. It is devoted strictly for search and rescue, as we'll take a look. So if ever you think of Kosbas and it appears on your FCC test, as I reiterate in this exact same format that we're covering, the COSPAS is devoted to search and rescue. So if you're making notes, you remember COSPAS is search and rescue. And COSPAS receives data from a device that is on every commercial vessel and should be on all private yachts. It receives data from an EPIRB. An EPIRB is an emergency position indicating radio beacon. If a boat starts to sink or you're in trouble, uh, the EPIRB, if it's either activated or put in the water, will send a signal up to the COSPAS satellites. What statement is true regarding 406 EPIRBs? Take a look at all of the statements. Does it allow voice communication? Does it allow the manual or automatic rescue coding? Does the GMDS radio operator program it? A, it transmits a unique hexadecimal coding number. Now, if somebody go, oh, I haven't been in school a while. What's he talking about? Hexadecimal system. It's a base 16 number system. But in that hexadecimal code, what's in there? Vessel's name, who owns the vessel, type of vessel, all vital information that would be needed to get the vessel rescued is in that hexadecimal position. Powerboat, sailboat, position of the vessel, etc. All of that is going to be in that hexadecimal ID that goes up to the EPIRB. So, or that goes from the EPIRB up to the satellite. So that's how the EPIRB is able to transmit positions for you. Let's go to our next slide. GMDSS explained. GMDSS. GMDSS was made for basically safety and having a redundant systems. But GMDSS has geostationary satellites. They circle the satellite in geosynchronous orbit to match the speed of the Earth. They come from the Earth's equatorial plane to match the speed, so that if you're someone on the ground, it's going to appear to you that that satellite does not move from your position. That's how you're able to get a geostationary satellite. So it appears to be fixed, but it is actually moving and tracking with the Earth's position. Let's go to slide 12. What's the purpose of the differential GPS system and how does it work? Well, GPS is basically going to be your navigational system. So it's going to tell you where you are. So let's take a look at your four choices. It basically is It basically corrects for errors using a fixed radio station position. Answer C is the correct answer, because the fixed position is the receiver up at the satellite. Now, how does that cover it? The fixed satellite is basically able to cover the time that it takes for the signal to reach the satellite. It also uses ionospheric delay. It also uses standard positioning GPS. It can track your position within basically 49 feet, 29 to 49 feet, once that system goes up. The EPIRB also has a bright strobe light on it, so that if a vessel is coming near you at night, within 49 feet, you're definitely going to see the strobe light as you get near it. There are other technologies involved. There's also another service that can go deeper than GPS, not used on boats. It's RTK, real-time kinematic positioning, where the satellite's position added positioning software can be added to satellites to get the tracking down to basically 1 centimeter. Can basically get your position down to a couple of inches for serious navigation. You don't need that on GMDSS, but It's to know that the set that GMDSS standard positioning service is the beginning, and it can be expanded from there if needed. How does GPS do it? It uses a phenomenon known as Doppler shift, and we're going to explain Doppler shift. This comes from the technician T8B07. What is Doppler shift? What is Doppler shift in reference to satellite communication? Take a look at the answers. I'll wait for a minute. Take a look at it. Observe change in signal frequency caused between the movement of the satellite. Now, I'm going to explain that Doppler shift a little bit to you in a much simpler way than you're going to get it from the books. When if a satellite is coming toward your position, it's going to appear to increase in frequency. If a satellite is moving away from you, it's going to go lower in frequency. But did you know that Doppler shift applies to sound? If you are standing next to a highway and cars seem to be whizzing by, you're going to hear all of a sudden, as the car is coming towards you, the pitch of the engine appears to rise. And then as the car passes you, the pitch of the engine appears to drop. That's the Doppler shift. So they found that Doppler shift worked in sound, and as sound waves are sound waves, and satellite waves are radio waves, so the Doppler shift also works in a radio wave. So computer algorithms are able to time the Doppler shift with a clock between the different satellites. So we're going to find out if we have to get a number of them to create what's called the probability of accuracy of where you are by using this phenomenon known as Doppler shift. It starts with an automobile standing to the next of the highway, going all the way up to the satellites in space. Let's take a look at our next slide. What describes the GPS satellites transmitted? Now you're going to see all of these choices. I'll get to the correct one in a minute, but take a look at them. The correct answer is D. The L1 carrier carries the navigation. So the L1 carrier of 1574 carries the navigation. That's the SPS codes that track you. And the L2 carrier measures the ionospheric delay. So your Doppler shift is on L2 and your standard positions are on L1. And the way the satellite is based, you cannot have them both on the same frequency. So with a satellite receiver, you basically have a receiver that's receiving on two frequencies, one for the standard position and one to basically track the delay so that you know exactly where you are based on the movement of the Doppler shift as the satellite's moving closer or farther away from your position. SPS stands for Standard Position Service, and that's what most maritime and either commercial or uh, uh, private yachts are using on their navigation. They're using the standard position because we can have accuracy between 29 and 49 feet to your relative position by use of that EPIRB, Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon. We're continuing GPS with the next slide. What's the minimum number of satellites that are needed to provide accuracy? Four. We need four satellites to provide accuracy. If we get down to that centimeter area, we're going to need five satellites plus enhanced capability on the receiver for that RTK, real-time kinematic positioning. So we need four satellites for basic and five when we get more precise. Let's take a look at the next slide. What's the GPS satellite orbiting altitude? 12,500 miles. Now, satellites come in three areas. We have LEO, which is down at low, for about under about 1,000 miles. Then we have MEO, which goes up to about 14,000 miles. That's where your GPS is, 12,500 miles. Then you have your geostationary satellites, which are up at about 22,000 miles. So all of them are at different heights to achieve different results for the various uses that they'll be using. So 12,500 miles is the standard for GPS tracking. Let's go to the next slide. A GPS satellite's orbits, what best describes them? Take a look at all the four choices. The correct answer after you've taken a look would be they're in six orbital planes. Answer A. Why would that be? The Earth's 24,000 miles, so they have to have six orbital. They have to have the orbital planes, basically covering up a quarter of the Earth's surface. Now we've taken a look. That is the end of our sample class on satellites. So you've had a look. You took a look at repeaters. You took a look at the various satellite systems that are up there. We've gone under LEO, MEO, and geosynchronous orbit satellites. We've covered GPS. Now we'll take a look at the various types of jobs that are available in the general radio telephone license exam. Now I took a look again. I ran them on Indeed. Now what we're going to tell you about these jobs, and most important, is that they're job titles, and you have to research them yourself. But the thing is, when you go to a school and apply in a class, you need to ask, what kind of jobs can titles should I look for? I've seen many classes, and even in the cybersecurity, where different job titles are not discussed. So we want to give you at least the job titles you can start searching for. So when we put these positions up, these are companies that are actually hiring. But if you can't get with these particular companies, look under these job titles, because they're going to open up jobs with other companies that are either listed or will be listed in the future, and it'll give you a good chance. It's where to look for jobs, and that's what we're talking about. Aircraft technician, airframe and power plant. So what happens is, if you went through a program, say at West LA College here or many other programs, uh, you'll be able to work on the plane's engines. You'll be able to work on the body of the aircraft, but without the general radio telephone license, you can't go into the cockpit and do adjustments to any equipment that's used to fly the plane. The radar, the GPS system, uh, the altimeter, all of that type of thing. You're going to have to be an aircraft power plant technician with a general radio telephone license to even touch or remove that equipment. And that's what's the important of the general radio telephone. If you're an airframe and power plant mechanic, that's why you need this license. That's BAE Systems is looking there. Rail radio communication systems technician. Well, on the railroads, especially those that are going from the United States to Canada, if you're going to work on any communications equipment for the railroad, and many times just to even validate your credentials to operate the navigational equipment in the train, you're going to need a general radio telephone license. King County is looking for that. That's up in Washington. Emergency communication and DAWS technical specialist. Well, this is the big one. This is the one where we're getting jobs every week. If you're a building inspector and you want to inspect buildings that have access to the public, uh, the buildings are now required to have fire sensors, wireless on every floor, and they go to a master antenna system on the roof that sends information to uh, the fire department and law enforcement in the case of emergency. Because what the goal of law enforcement wants to do is to basically ensure that if there is a fire or any kind of disaster, they want to be notified quickly. I mentioned in the last webinar about our California Yacht Club fire. It was 45 minutes into the fire before the fire department even got notified. Whose fault, we don't know, but the point we do know is that sometimes the panic of the situation and the confusion can cause these delays. And if you have a antenna distribution system for buildings to have something like this, you can avoid that type of disaster and possibly save property, and perhaps in many cases save many lives. So you're going to see a lot more use for the general radio telephone license in this regard. So it's in the wireless communication department, and companies are springing up to provide this service for buildings that serve the public. That's hospitals, schools, stadiums, Anything that serves the public is going to have this as these buildings are remodeled and reconstructed. Then you'll also see specialists in national fire and life safety. That's coming up because the fire department is now requiring it in 34 states. They'll be requiring it in all 50 very soon. Aircraft avionics technician, that's the same thing as airframe and power plants. But again, that's another job title. You'll be able to find the same type of jobs getting into that cockpit and working on the equipment. That's Sterling Helicopter. So if you wanted to work on navigational equipment in the helicopter, um, what happened with Kobe Bryant? What was there something wrong with the? I think there was something wrong with the altimeter. Why did they hit a mountain? Something went wrong. Somebody had to align it, and that's having that altimeter aligned because the altimeter is on 4,200 megahertz or 4.2 gigahertz. But here's the problem that a lot of people aren't talking about all of this stuff. They've put 5G very close to the same frequency of aircraft altimeter. So you're going to have to, so people that understand altimeters and alignment have to understand that in areas where there is 5G, it could create a false altimeter reading. Did that happen to Kobe Bryant? We don't know, but it could happen to people. Did it happen in Iran recently with the helicopter crash? We don't know. But we do know the two are overlapping, and unless those altimeter and the GPS systems are aligned and they can be fixed so that the equipment on the helicopter can distinguish between ground and a 5G network, that's what's going to be needed, and that's going to take the skill and operation of a general radio telephone license. That was as the Croydon Company is offering that job. Let's go to our last slide in the webinar. GMDSS jobs. Now, GMDSS is Global Marine Distress Safety Service. You have to pass all the tests. Jobs are available for the merchant marines, but there's also some other jobs if you want to work on land with a GMDSS certification, and they are Deck Watch Officer. Well, Deck Watch Officer is the same as an electronics officer. So if you look for two titles, Deck Watch Officer, Electronics Officer, you're responsible for keeping and maintaining equipment on a ship's bridge. Sekuliak, Alaska. That's at University of Alaska. Port Captain. That's another job. If you wanted to be a port captain, you're going to have a GMDSS license. That's for also another job. Third mate, National Geographics is looking, but if you're going to work for National Geographics and you want to work the radio equipment, GMDSS license again will be important because of all the equipment you'll be responsible for. Make dash hornblower, Norfolk VA. So hornblower for their party vessels, they're all over the country, are requiring people have a full set of licenses, including GMDSS, if you're going to maintain and operate the radio equipment on board the ship. It's actually Seaward Services for Hornblower Wind. All these jobs are on Indeed, so you can look them up for yourself. Vessel Bridge Officer is another job. Oceaneering, Morgan City, Louisiana. And that's another job. All right, those takes care of the jobs. And as now we're getting ready to wrap up the webinar, we're going to talk about what we'll be discussing in our next webinar. Our next webinar is going to cover, because we covered satellites today, our next webinar will be to discuss the ionosphere. How does it work? How does it make refract radio signals back to Earth? What makes it operate? What are the different frequencies? Can you use the ionosphere as a tool to achieve communication, just like carpenters use tools to build a house? You can if you know the times of day and the characteristics of each frequency. You know how to use it and what way to use it for, what distances, and how to communicate. That is very possible, and in the next webinar, we will cover it. So again, I want to thank you very much for staying tuned and listening to the webinar today. I'm Charles Pascal, and we'll be looking for you. We'll have our next webinar up on June 15th, talking about the ionosphere and radio wave propagation.